Hey, welcome to the Bionicle Inspiration Series, the show where we spotlight Bionicle MOCs from across the community to give you a little bit of inspiration for whatever it is that you want to build with your own MOCs, your own pieces, your own stuff. Today, we're going to be talking about, well, it's a theme I've done a couple times, but it's one that people have always enjoyed. It's parts spamming. So what do I mean by parts spamming? Well, obviously we'll talk about it in detail throughout the episode, but essentially the sort of overall premise of parts spamming is to quite literally do that. Get very similar or the exact same piece and spam it across the MOC. Just use a whole bunch of it to achieve some really interesting textures. And it's one of those cool things because if you go to like the Pick-a-Brick wall at the Lego store, or you go on lego.com or Bricks and Pieces or Bricklink or wherever it is you want to buy your Lego, and you want to maybe buy some pieces in a larger quantity, the cool thing is then you can kind of achieve really interesting textures, and it can sometimes be a little bit cheaper too if you are sort of buying in bulk. So it's a bit more of a sort of cost-effective, really cool way to achieve some nice textures and some unique looks on your MOC. So let's look at 4 MOCs today that really exemplify that and show it off in a nice fashion. The very first MOC that uses some very nice part spamming is by Wormy World, and this is Viridi's Rage. So there's a couple different examples of part spamming here. The first one is on the sort of like, I guess, sort of leg design of this MOC. It's kind of not really a leg design, doesn't have legs, but you know, where the legs should be at least. So this really weird sort of multicolored piece here, which is sort of that sort of translucent green, but also sort of that sort of like silver color as well. This piece comes from this Ninjago spinner sort of set. And it came in a few different other colors as well, depending on the ninja or the set that you got. But it's a really, really cool piece, and you don't really see it being used all that much, or at least I haven't seen it being used all that much. So it's really refreshing to see this piece being used, but it's also even cooler to see it forming this gorgeous looking sort of, you know, lower body design, I suppose is maybe the better way to word it. What I think is cool about it is it kind of reminds me of like elementals from, you know, fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, whatever, because often they're sort of like wisps of whatever element they are. Like if it's a fire elemental or something, they're just sort of like, it's just sort of a bunch of fire, or, you know, maybe it's like a wind elemental and it's just sort of like a wisp of air. So kind of in this sense, I kind of get a similar vibe, you know. I don't think this is specifically some sort of elemental of sorts, but it's certainly a similar concept. And hey, maybe you want to build some sort of elemental, maybe you could use some of the other colors that this piece comes in and recreate something similar, or just get similar looking pieces and do the same. But it's gorgeous to see how when these pieces are just repeated like this, you get this almost sort of like crystalline look to this sort of lower leg area here, and it just looks gorgeous. And it's cool too how it sort of reflects the Liwa G2 blade that's sort of like the weapon of this character here, because they kind of both have very similar textures. You know, I think something that's so important about part spamming is getting that sort of consistency in textures, because, you know, something that can always make a MOC look good is to have really sort of consistent textures all across it. You know, sometimes if you have a piece on a MOC that just isn't the right texture, it can look really out of place and it kind of can detract from the MOC. So when you do a bit of part spamming and it's all consistent, and maybe you don't just put it in one area, you put it across the whole MOC, things start to look a little bit more consistent and nice. So it's a smart idea to do that, or at least find pieces that have similar textures like this here. It's cool. The other example of part spamming on this MOC is on the torso. So this uses some kind of like claw pieces, which I originally thought were the skull spider leg pieces, but there is a sort of subtly different variant there of this claw piece, which I believe is those specific claw pieces. Those came on like Rocker and a few other different sets as well. But honestly, you could use either or of those pieces. I mean, heck, if you bought even just like a couple G2 Bionicle sets, you probably have like 2 or 3 skull spiders lying around, and as a result, you probably have like, you know, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, however many of these pieces already there, so you could do a very similar design relatively easily if you want to take apart your skull spiders, of course. But it's nice, you know, it gives it a bit more of a sort of interesting design and a skeletal look, and it's cool how there's some of those other translucent pieces in the center there that look like some sort of like heart or energy core or something, and the ribcage is kind of protecting that. It's a nice little design. And also, speaking of nice designs, I love the sort of like presentation of this MOC. Obviously, some of these pictures here, we're seeing it up close and getting a look at the actual character. But some of these other images here, we can see some pretty cool, like, I don't know, dead creatures and beings and things that have been stabbed to death or bleeding or whatever. It certainly is an interesting way of presenting your mock, because it certainly gives a bit of backstory, and you really get the sense that, like, oh, hey, this guy, yeah, he's killed a bunch of people. He's not someone you mess with. He seems like some sort of boss in a video game or something, you know? So it's some fun presentation there that I think definitely complements the mock. So that's pretty cool. So a fantastic mock here. Let's move on to the next one. This one here is by CareCreations, and this is, and I'm probably going to say this wrong, so I apologize, Oyonidae the Devourer. So what I like about this is it's using a whole bunch of these Mixel-eye pieces, which if you bought a bunch of Mixels in the past, or even if you go to Pick a Brick Wall these days, there's often just a massive tub of Mixel-eyes in all the different sort of existing forms that they have. You can get them as the sort of like 1x1 round tiles, or you can get them like this, where it's an actual sort of like ball joint. There's a few different varieties of it, and they're pretty easy to come across, at least from my experience. I found them in a bunch of bulk lots before, or just, they come in a few different sets these days, you know. So it's cool to see these Mixel-eyes getting some use. You know, there's something about this mock that is very sort of like Lovecraftian. So like, I just sort of looked up this definition of Lovecraftian, if you're not familiar with it, because I think it sums up this mock well, and also kind of sums up a sort of mocking style that you could certainly adapt yourself. So a Lovecraftian monster is at its core something that is so alien to the human experience that both the reader and the protagonist is incapable of true comprehension. It may be from a different world, a different dimension, created by different gods, or have no understandable origin. So yeah, a lot of sort of like Lovecraftian monsters like Cthulhu and other stuff out there, that's sort of the idea, that it's just this mesh of like, you know, tentacles and eyes and, you know, different body parts are in places you wouldn't expect and stuff. And it's so alien and so weird and so distinct that it's just cool to look at, you know? So maybe that's sort of a visual style you want to go with on one of your mocks. And I think part spamming works perfectly for Lovecraftian stuff, because, you know, what kind of creature on our world that's a part of the human experience do we look at and has that many eyes? You know, not that I can certainly think of. Or maybe things we don't know about that exist under the depths of the ocean that we've not explored. Who knows? But still, this is a clever idea, and I think it complements part spamming very well. So very cool to see so many Mixel-eyes being used there. And I guess you could argue there's some part spamming as well on the sort of red tentacles here. It's you know, a bit more sort of straightforward. It's not as complex, I suppose, but doesn't stop it being cool, and it makes sense on some sort of weird kraken squid-like creature like this, you know. And obviously there's certainly a lot of inspiration being taken from like squids and krakens and things. So even if you do want to go a little bit more Lovecraftian and make it so completely alien and different from anything you've ever seen, you could still get a little bit of inspiration from real-world creatures and things as well. So yeah, certainly something to consider. But yeah, some nice examples of part spamming here that certainly make for a bit more of a creepy, distinct mock. And I love too that he's using the one of the Lego Planet pieces that came on sort of older waves of Star Wars sets. There are a few different planet sets. I believe this one here is Naboo, the one I'm showing you now, I believe. Might be wrong. You know, there were a few that looked fairly similar there. But I guess in this sort of context, it's supposed to resemble Earth. And, you know, Naboo kind of does resemble Earth, so that's totally fair. But yeah, a fantastic little mock here and a great example of part spamming. The next mock here is by VelociJACKtor, and this is PITtober 2021 Zyglak. I should know how to pronounce that because it is actually an official, semi-official Bionicle model. So it was kind of like a combiner model from the old Baraki days in 2007. Here's some actual images of the original. Some of these are just, you know, people have recreated and taken some photos of it, but I'll also include some images of the original instructions for it as well. Those may not be the best pictures of those instructions, but they were certainly the best quality images I could find in my quick little search. But it wouldn't be difficult to go online and have a look for those instructions. So I definitely recommend you do if you can, because hey, maybe you want to build that actual original model because, you know, it was a canon character sort of thing. So there you go. But the Zyglak, however you want to pronounce it, as cool as it was, there were certainly some elements of it that are more sort of a product of the time, you know, using the sort of techniques and pieces that were available, and I'm sure to a degree that the combo model was made with kids in mind so that it was playable, and it was limited because it was only using pieces from certain sets, you know, a variety of different things. So it's lovely to see the basic premise of that character be reimagined using modern pieces, modern techniques, and more sort of like complex techniques as well, you know. So it's cool. Not to diss the original model. The original model is actually quite nice, but I got to admit this one's pretty cool. So what I like about this is the part spamming of a whole bunch of different Hero Factory armor shells. So there's specifically the dark red ones along the spine there. Now I imagine those are just attached using various different sort of flex tubing elements, which also helps to get that sort of beautiful curve, the almost sort of S curve there. But it's nice to see them also being you know, the same sort of technique, but in orange with the sort of smaller Hero Factory armor shell pieces there to sort of form the kind of like belly or just sort of the underside of the tail there, which it does. It looks quite nice. And of course, a whole bunch of other Hero Factory shell pieces are used on the arms, and similar sort of textured Hero Factory like shoulder armor and stuff is used elsewhere. So again, you get that consistency all throughout this mock. The textures are all very sort of smooth and just very consistent. It looks like something you would expect to see on some sort of underwater creature like this. So it was just very visually pleasing, isn't it? But it's also nice to see how there's still a sort of subtle difference between the orange Hero Factory armor and the dark red armor, because, you know, the orange armor is sort of placed, well, actually they're kind of placed in a fairly similar manner. Ignore what I just said. The logic being that they're placed sort of like upright almost, so that the natural sort of like jutting out area on the dark red armor specifically sort of forms like spikes along the back as well, which is just kind of cool. So it's interesting to see pieces being placed sort of in a slightly different way to how they're normally placed, but totally taking advantage of that and then kind of adding to the mock, making it look a little bit sort of, you know, spiky and rigid almost. It's cool. There's also a little bit more part spamming, I suppose, with the black spikes on the back as well. So, you know, not as many pieces are being spammed there, but it's nice to see the sort of varying sizes of those spikes, and I would still argue that that is part spamming there. So you don't necessarily have to use the exact same piece, you could use very similar pieces. There's a whole bunch of different kind of claw or tooth elements like that in varying sizes, so there's no reason you couldn't use, you know, varying sizes like that to achieve a similar look. It still kind of works as part spamming, maybe it's sort of slightly bending the rules, but, you know, the rules are meant to be broken, and I don't really think there is a rule book specifically, so you're probably not even breaking any sort of written rule. And we should have a written rule of Bionicle mocking techniques, I suppose, but even still, break the rules, who cares, do whatever you want. That looks really lovely. I love too the head design here, obviously very similar to the original, you know, using the Prydak Baraki white foot piece there to sort of form a very sort of really nice looking head design there, very sort of like angular and menacing. It looks like something you'd expect to see on an underwater creature. But what I love about it is the very subtle inclusion of a white crana element, just to kind of fill in the gap on the foot where it would normally attach to the leg. It's very nice, just a nice way of kind of rounding that off there. It's a lovely little piece use. And speaking of nice piece uses, it's cool to see some of those white tooth pieces kind of embedded in these silver-like tusks. They're just kind of shoved into the natural gaps in that piece, and it really helps form a beautiful-looking sort of mouth design here. It's really, really cool. So love your work, good sir. Let's move over to the final mock now. This is by Djokson, and this is Dissector dominak. So what's cool about this is, again, a few different examples of part spamming. We can specifically see some of these white cone pieces being used here on the arms and the legs. And there's also this sort of like black ring. I don't fully know what that is. It might be a cut piece. I don't know. It might be some of the sort of like thicker tubing that's been cut up. I don't know. It could be rubber bands. Maybe Djokson will have to let us know, or maybe you've got eagle eyes and you can see what it is where Ben cannot. But I don't know, that's what I think it is. But regardless, that's a really nice technique there. Even if you didn't have the little sort of black rings in there and it was just the sort of white there, because it kind of looks very similar to what you would see on like beetles or any kind of insect for the most part, where they have a very sort of distinct, almost sort of like hairy, kind of crunchy look to it. I never know the right term for bugs, but crunchy is just the perfect term. Mitch Henry kind of coined that in an older podcast we did there, but it's surprisingly perfect at describing a bug sort of texture there. So I'm gonna keep using it. But yeah, no, it's perfect, especially with some of these images I'm showing you here. You can very easily see it's sort of tying back to that, which is very clearly what this is based off of. It does say that in the description, and it also says in the description that this is based off Torrent Axe 97, some of his work, because this was like a Secret Santa present for him. So be sure to check the links in the description and check out some of the stuff that Torrent Axe has done as well, because he's a very talented builder that we featured before, and he has a very sort of distinct style too, which has been very effectively recreated here by Djokson, so definitely worth checking out. But yeah, it's great to see those cone pieces being spammed to perfectly recreate a very sort of bug-like look. It's awesome. I also thoroughly enjoy the inclusion of some of these handcuff pieces on the torso. I don't know, it's just a weird, unique design there. It's this interesting sort of like rib cage almost. Again, it seems very bug-like and very fitting. And, you know, those handcuff pieces come in a variety of different LEGO City police sets, and there's almost always a police set available, so if you ever want to grab some of those, they're decently easy to come by, and it makes for a nice little torso design here, that's for sure. Again, we can see some more of these different sort of varying sizes of claw pieces, whether it's these very large white claws on the hands, or kind of the hands, I suppose, or maybe just an extension of the arm. These obviously came on like WitchDoctor, but they came in a few other sets in different colors and things as well. But we can also see other claw pieces on the head here, sort of as horns and things. And I guess you could kind of argue there's some other, you know, different claw pieces like that on the feet and a few other different places as well. So it's nice to see, again, just all the different varying sizes of those and how they all sort of work very nicely in unison to create a very nice sort of overall look here. So a lot of different examples of part spamming on this one, and it just works so very well. It's really cool to see. So that's a whole bunch of different examples of part spamming today and different ways that you might be able to use it if it's a technique that you want to employ. So definitely maybe next time you build something, think about maybe doing some part spamming, because it could work very well. And check your collection. Maybe you've got a whole bunch of one specific piece in a larger quantity. Maybe it's time to finally put it to use. Who knows? Thank you very much for watching, though. Like I said, check the links in the description to see more from these builders today, and maybe some of the other inspiration and things in the descriptions on this MOC, where there might be a little bit more stuff that I didn't cover here. So definitely worth checking out and leaving some love on the original MOCs, because I couldn't do these episodes without those builders, so definitely let them know what you think. Additionally, in the description is links to my own social media, so if you want to see some of the stuff that I've got going on, that is the place to check it out. Additionally, if you want to see some of your own MOCs on the show, you can submit them through the submission email that's on your screen right now. Send me whatever you want in that email, and I'll do my best to put it in a future episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. And if you have more questions about that, there are various videos on the channel explaining how you can submit MOCs. So that's the way to check it out if you've got some questions about how exactly you want to do that. Finally, as well, I have a Patreon, so if you're interested in supporting me for even just as little as $1 a month, you can have access to additional content like weekly podcasts, Q&A videos, behind-the-scenes stuff, access to my private Discord server, all sorts of cool perks. And also, if you're interested in sending anything my way, I have a P.O. box. It's on the screen right now. You can send anything my way if you want to, but there's no obligation to do so. Same with the Patreon, only if you're interested in supporting, or if you have something that you want to send my way, that's the way to do so. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you very, very much enjoyed. Happy building, and bye for now.